Good afternoon, everyone. Happy Tuesday. Welcome to America, Some Assembly Required. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit more about sheriffs, hopefully when Anna gets here. She's not here yet. And then we'll move on to talking about counselors of law. After that, the last role that we have to describe in our Jural Assembly then becomes our notary publics, or public notaries. Today I want to just kind of continue to talk a little bit more about the sheriff. Last week we talked about how communication was an extremely important part of our sheriffs. Now, our sheriffs are not policy enforcers like the county of sheriffs. They're not there to enforce the codes and the statutes. They're there to really help keep the peace. They are the main peacekeeper on their counties, and they are all county-based sheriffs. We have no state-based sheriffs, and they're there to also organize their deputies. Now, their deputies can be appointed. Sheriff can appoint a deputy. Deputies are not necessarily they're not elected by their county. Only the sheriff is. So as we begin, we need to make sure that our sheriffs are lawful, that they understand what common law and are willing to uphold that public law. And so a very important job of that sheriff is to make sure that he or she is communicating with the people, with his deputies, organizing all of those people within. It may also require him at some point organizing a detail that provides security at the jail for anybody that we have necessarily incarcerated. It may make agreements with our county in terms of jail space if we need it. County sheriff is going to be, working with and helping to provide for those prisoners at the time, transport of those prisoners at the time, so that not only are we safe, but that the prisoners themselves are safe and get the due process of law. County sheriffs can go into a courtroom, and if something is not going completely correct in the courtroom, they actually can stop the court process and or arrest a justice for not doing the right things. So very important jobs of the sheriff. They're also there to make sure that as our counties are defended, they're there in charge of essentially our border defense with whatever is going on within our counties. But they also play that role of they have to be able to communicate with their county of sheriff to provide interface between our jurisdiction and their jurisdiction. They have to develop that relationship so that when things go on and it involves one of us, an ASN or an ASC, that we have that kind of advocacy and proper interface between them and our people. And so it is really important that our sheriffs be able to communicate, organize. They're going to have staff to organize, not only administrative type staff, office staff, communication staff. They're going to have their deputies, however many that may be, and then turn around and they also have to be able to organize and work within our militias and work within a posse that would happen to go out. When would the time be for a posse? Well, let's say we have a child missing. Sheriff might organize a posse to go look for that child, or maybe it's an older adult that has Alzheimer's. Sheriff would organize a posse to go and look for that. So posses aren't only just used to go out and look for somebody who has violated the law, but it's also there, remember, to their main purpose is to ensure the safety of the people of their county and their property. And so going out and searching for the lost sometimes are important parts of what our county sheriff does. Now, our county sheriffs aren't there to actually, enforce any kind of a policy necessarily. So unlike our county of sheriffs, they're going to probably be interfacing with those sheriffs to stop them from trespassing on an American state national. And yes, our sheriffs also need to have the ability, if need be, arrest powers, and be able to use physical force. So they have to know how to defend themselves. They have to know the proper way to make an arrest. And then they have to know what to do with that arrest once they've made that arrest. Where do you take it? Where do you take them? So those are all some of the other duties that our sheriffs had. And I just see that Anna joined us, so I'm going to be bringing Anna on stage here in a minute. So you can see how that interpersonal communication, written communication, they're going to be writing to their people on their county, and including the county of personnel in terms of their services. So really important that our sheriffs not just be placeholders, not just be warm bodies, but they possess the skills and the temperaments to do the jobs well. So I'm going to bring Anna on stage. Hi, Anna. Good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Sorry I'm late.
That's okay. I figured you were on the phone or busy.
Yeah, well, it's been one of those mornings and one of those days.
Again.
Again.
It's again. So, yeah. So I last week I kind of punted a little bit, started talking about county sheriffs. As I wrote you and said, I think one of the things that many of the assemblies may miss in terms of looking at county sheriffs is the importance of communication. That those sheriffs need to have the ability to have interpersonal communications, conflict management communications. They need to be able to have written communications, and they've got to have public speaking skills, right? Those are all important.
They are, because, we have a message, and a lot of what we need to get across is new information so far as these people are concerned. They've never heard what we're telling them. They're too young. I mean, let's face it. They don't remember, right? They weren't taught. And so this is an educational experience for them. And we need to bring forward the information in a way that's credible and that is succinct, and that they can check out for themselves. And as much as possible, we need to get other people that are already in law enforcement to come forward and explain it to them, because we do have an increasing large number of sheriffs and police officers who do understand what we're saying and who do know the history. So as we get more and more of those people involved, we'll have a better chance of having the kind of fruitful, good coordination and communication that's needed here. One of the things that I've found helpful is giving them a copy of Mack and Prinz versus USA Inc., which is a U.S. Supreme Court case, in which they very clearly tell the corporate sheriffs that they have to use their discretion to determine if someone is owed their constitutional guarantees or not. Now, obviously, it's simpler and easier for the corporation if they can just, railroad everybody and throw everybody in the same box and run them over with the same bus, right? And so there's a certain amount of pull in that direction. And, people that are lazy, people that don't want to admit any gray areas, don't necessarily like to hear the word discretion, because that puts the responsibility back on them.
It does.
And they also don't like the liability, which is the other side of that's the other end of the stick. Because if they don't respect your constitutional guarantees and you are owed them, then they become liable for any harm or any infraction. And so you want to give them both the carrot and the stick.
Right. The stick being outside the Clearfield doctrine that applies then to that when they're outside of their governmental immunity types of powers, right?
They really don't have any.
Right.
That went away when they became incorporated entities. The Clearfield doctrine kicks in, and they're just like, employees of Walmart or 7-Eleven or, any corporate structure. They don't have any special powers. They don't have any special state immunities, except for foreign states, you see, because we have to realize that we've been living in a British territorial protectorate, and they've tried to get away with calling it a military protectorate, but in fact, the people that are administering this quote unquote protectorate are in mercenary service. So that's all bogus. That's all fraudulent too. There is no military protectorate. There's only a mercenary service that is performing military duties. And so there is no valid protectorate. There is no valid application of the law of war. And there is no legal or lawful occupation allowable under a protectorate, because we don't have a proper national military. What we have is a mercenary force under contract to provide military services. And that's an entirely different bailiwick and bogey. So once you realize that this incorporated entity has a contract, once you realize that this is a private foreign commercial corporation with a contract to provide us with enumerated services, it completely changes your perspective on how the government is organized and who owes who and who has state immunity and who doesn't, and who is owed the constitutional guarantees and who isn't. And it really begins to become apparent that there's a reason why Mac and Prinz versus USA comes out as it does and says, well, guys, it's up to your discretion. And it lays the responsibility back on the individual to figure out whether the people that he's encountering are owed their constitutional rights or not. One of the things that we always advise people to do if they're stopped in an encounter with law enforcement is to flat out just ask. You can always ask questions. Don't make statements, ask questions. Ask, am I being arrested? Yes or no? If I'm not being arrested, am I free to go? Is this a consensual stop? Is this supposed to be a consensual stop or an arrest?
Mhm.
And basically, they have no right to detain you unless they can state their probable cause and actually carry through on an arrest.
Right.
If they start questioning you, they have no right to question you.
No.
You can tell them who you are in terms of you can give them your name, you can give them an address where you can be contacted, and that's really all that you are obligated to give them. And so you can limit it to that and say, I'm claiming my Fifth Amendment guarantees otherwise. So then they know, oh, well, I'm not going to get her to talk. I'm not going to get her to, make a mistake and give away her rights. I'm in deep trouble now, right? Because she's taken the Fifth. And then you want to request an attorney to be present. You want a public defender, or you want to call your attorney, whichever. And you want to say that you do not consent to any search or seizure of your car.
Right.
Okay, so you want to get those things laid down right up front if you're in an arrest situation.
Because exercising your Fourth Amendment rights, which means you don't have to subject yourself to their search or seizure, is important to go with that Fifth Amendment right, that you don't have to speak to them.
Right.
Thanks, I don't answer questions, right? But for
Right.
our sheriffs, and what we've been talking about is our sheriffs
Mhm.
and what they're really on their counties to do, besides the communication. They're not out there road pirating or enforcing policy, right?
Right.
We don't have policy, so they're really out there to take care of any problems that someone might have. You've got somebody coming to your door and trespassing, creating trespass on your property, whether that's a de facto or whatever. You call your land and soil sheriff and they come and throw them off, right?
Well, that's the way it's supposed to work. Now, I've seen it work very effectively where one of our sheriffs shows up and goes directly to whomever and says, why are you trespassing on this land, which is owned by blah, blah, blah? And they won't have an answer. They really don't understand what they're doing, is what it amounts to. And so you ask them, why are you trespassing on this parcel? Can't you see that it's posted? That it's not part of the state trust? You know, like I say, you can always ask questions. You can never get in trouble asking questions. And so, when I'm um, forced to interact with these people at all, it's always in the form of questions. Do you know where you are? Do you know what my name is? Uh, do you have any reason or right to require information of me? If so, what is it? What is the basis of your right to question me about anything? We don't answer questions, so we're really wondering what your authority could be. It just depends on the circumstance, but you start asking them questions that they can't easily answer. And most of the time, you'll find they can't answer. They don't have any background in law. They can cite you chapter and verse of their regulations, but when you ask them things like, well, what reason do you have to think that I'm subject to your regulation?
Right. So, in that circumstance, how do our sheriffs react?
Our sheriffs would very calmly explain the basis of their jurisdiction, that they're the highest peacekeeping officer in the borders of the county, that they have an obligation to the people of this country to protect and guarantee their constitutional and individual natural unalienable rights.
Okay. All right. So how do our sheriffs handle, let's say we've got an ASN or an ASC who hasn't behaved well, and they have to go and make this arrest. What do they need to do that?
Well, it does depend on the circumstance. If there is a clear and present danger, things take on a different character than if it's just some sort of squabble or dispute over property.
Mm-hmm.
You can see that. You always want to have at least two witnesses to any action that engages with the federal citizens.
Okay.
So that's something to have in mind. You should have a couple of good precedents at common law, even though their sheriffs are not trained in law. But you should have a couple of examples of what you are disputing with the incorporated sheriff over. Because, well, say, for example, someone has been murdered in your county, then both the local sheriff, the county sheriff, and the county of employee acting as sheriff will have an interest in catching the murderer and seeing them brought to trial for the crime. So they should be able to communicate and work together to find the suspect and bring them to trial. Now, of course, that's a criminal instance. When you have a property issue, it's much less serious, and it may or may not be criminal. So there you have an issue where the county sheriff is acting in support of an information. And an information can be a description of a crime, or it can be a description of a illegal search or seizure. I mean, there are so many different ways that can play. But in any event, what you have is a desire to have at least two witnesses of your own people and to engage in a friendly, hopefully enlightening conversation with the local incorporated sheriffs. One of the things that happened this past week is that Mr. Trump failed to establish standing for his claims. And so that will have a major league effect on all of us in that we are now recognized as being in control of our own affairs, and the territorial system is being dismembered by court orders that have seen the difference. They've seen the difference in jurisdiction, the difference in political nature and status, and they're honoring that. So that will bring us to an entirely different procedure and different kinds of opportunities and authorities that we haven't had in the past, but which the sheriff will be able to exercise directly. So, for example, say that someone is being accused of not registering their vehicle. Well, that's a crime in the eyes of the sheriff but it has not been a crime in actual fact for the general public for decades. And it's all long settled and dried and set aside in the archives that given this particular situation, the Department of Transportation has no authority, or the Department of Public Safety, or the state trooper agency, or whichever agency is running this revenue scheme. And that's essentially what it is. It's a form of racketeering in the name of public health and safety.
It is. So, so if we have to make our sheriffs have to make an arrest, this is a big question for many assemblies that I've spoken to is, well, now what do we do with them, right? What do our sheriffs need to do to either, do they have to make an agreement with the county of sheriff for space in the jail? Do they get their own jail? We've even looked at on Ohio the ability to buy containers that have the steel bars on them and being able to put, air conditioning and heating units in them. And if we had to, we could hold them in something like that as well. So, what do our sheriffs have to do to hold somebody in that way?
Well, we found that normally what's happening is that the state trust is renting out courtroom and jail and prison facility space. And you can just basically come in and rent room in your courthouse to run your court. And you can rent room in your jail system to house prisoners. So it's actually just a matter of money.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I've mentioned many times to the assemblies when we talk about court venues, about especially here east of the Mississippi, we have wonderful old courthouses that the courtrooms are already set up more or less for common law courts. And so that many of those courthouses are now used as public meeting space, not necessarily as courtroom space anymore. So that's a possibility too.
Well, most of those courthouses were built with our public money, and they know that.
Hmm.
So there's a certain amount of reluctance on their part to let us participate. There's a certain amount of reluctance on our part to actually have to pay for our own facilities, the use of our own buildings, which is something that we will be addressing over time. But in the short run, it makes sense for us to rent space in the courthouse to hold our courts. It makes sense for us to rent space to keep inmates to the extent that we need to do so. Because otherwise, people have gone out on a limb and provided space for free, or they have gone to acknowledge public spaces and held court. But that makes it look like we're not real. It makes it look like we're not professional.
Right.
And there's really no escape or reason that we should continue to let that happen, because we can rent the same space just as they do from the state trust officials.
Okay. All right. Awesome. So what else would you have to say to our land and soil sheriffs regarding their roles in their counties?
They are, hands down, the highest peacekeeping officer in their county. And within their county, they are the highest peacekeeping officer in the country. Mm-hmm. There's nobody who overstands them. There's nobody who has more right to dictate what goes on in that county than its own county sheriff.
Okay. All right. So, how does the county sheriff then interface with militia while we're on the topic?
Well, ideally, the county sheriff is known to the militia, and the militia is known to him. And if he gets in trouble and needs help, he should be able to apply to the State Assembly to deploy militia to his county, right? But the truth of the matter is that one of our sheriffs can directly deputize any number of people that he needs to address a problem. Say that a county sheriff has a bank robbery in his county. Okay, this is robbery under force. More than $5,000 has been stolen. And what do we do about it? Do we just kind of sit on our hands? And if we decide to give chase, do we chase them over the border to the next county? There are a lot of questions that go on in someone's mind when they're looking at that kind of a situation. So it's important that our county sheriffs be aware of their plenipotentiary power within the county only extends within the county and ends at the border. And so he needs to have good relationships with I'm going to have to take this call.
Okay.
Just give me a moment.
Sure, go ahead. So with the plenipotentiary powers that she's talking about, those exist within that national jurisdiction. And so they, within his county, again, as Anna said, the county sheriff is the highest peacekeeper. He's the highest peacekeeper over any of the de facto officials as well But, even the county sheriff from the next county over can't just walk on his county and do his thing. He has to make sure that he's working through and with the county sheriff. So it makes sense for that county sheriff to develop the relationships with the county sheriffs that are around him, just as the states are developing relationships within their postal area and also their bordering states if they're not in their postal area. So that makes complete and total sense.
Right. And they're also going to want to have a good relationship with the militia because, say something happens in your county and you have a need for more people than you have available. I mean, a county sheriff can deputize as many men as he needs. But if you don't have the people there, you just don't have the people there, right?
Right.
So what happens? A flood comes, and there's looting, and there's mayhem, and people are trapped in buildings and are in need of rescue and heavy equipment and all this stuff. He has to be able to call on not only his other county sheriffs, he needs to be able to call on the militia. He needs to be able to call on the National Guard. He needs to be able to interface with all these different other law enforcement and peacekeeping organizations, and they all need to know who they are and who they work for and what their authority is and where it extends and where it doesn't, and to be able to communicate together to bring forward an appropriate response. When you think about the county sheriff can deputize people for work within the county borders in the same way that John Wayne could, as a U.S. Marshal, could deputize people to go after gangs of outlaws across state lines and even into foreign countries. The difference is that the power of the county sheriff begins and ends at the county borders.
Right. So the last time we were talking last week, and I related to everybody, if they went and watched old episodes of Andy Taylor, right?
Mayberry RFD.
Mayberry RFD. Go back to Mayberry RFD. That was however, it was a good example of our common law sheriffs, because he was there to really protect the people. Even good old Otis, who was the town drunk. Remember Otis? He was even trained to come in and put himself in his own jail cell and hang the keys up, right?
That is the way it used to be.
It is.
I remember that.
I do too.
Our county sheriff was elected, Mr. Larkin, and he was a beloved member of the community. Everybody knew him. Everybody trusted him. And everything was run according to the ultimate best good of the community and the individuals in it. It was not, the attitude was totally different. Mm-hmm. The attitude was to help and protect. It was not to harass and raise revenue from.
Right. Well, this question came up in our Jural Assembly about, well, what if our county sheriff discovered somebody was drunk and driving? My question was, is there harm or is there no harm? Right? Because if you pull them over, you could, and they're visibly very inebriated, then the sheriff has a duty to protect them and to protect us from them. So what he could do is he could have a deputy come and drive the man's car to his home and park it in the driveway and take the man and see him home and take the keys, right?
And
They can come pick the keys up tomorrow.
they used to do that. They used to just park the car along the side of the road, and the squad car would take the guy home and, sober up tomorrow. You
Right.
can come get your keys when you're sober.
There you are. So, that was a great example, but it really is, that was from a day and time when the revenue was not so much the answer, but the public safety and the personal safety of each man and woman was primary. And the sheriff really developed those relationships so that, they could take and really help the Otises of our world, keep themselves safe, but also keep other people safe from their ways.
Right. Well, and, it used to be and could be again that, a county sheriff and his deputies are driving along and they see someone, a motorist who is stopped on the side of the road, struggling with a situation. They ran out of gas.
Flat
They
tire.
Flat tire. Their passenger is sick, and they stop to let the person void themselves for whatever reason, and they need to find a hospital. There are all sorts of situations that come up, and it used to be that the county sheriff or his deputies would be driving along and they would see a situation, they would stop, they would inquire, they would help. I don't know how many times we had women in labor and their husbands were trying to drive them to the hospital, and the sheriff would turn on his lights and his emergency lights and would escort the couple to the hospital. All sorts of things like that. A guy's having a heart attack. The sheriff and his deputy arrive and give him CPR and throw him in the back of the squad car and zoom him to the hospital with the lights on. This used to be commonplace kind of things that, the sheriff is called by the local five and dime store owner because there's two kids that are out of school who shouldn't be at the drugstore counter at 2:00 in the afternoon. So the sheriff's office gets on the phone to the parents. Your kids are here. They're out of school. What's the deal here? And they're unaccompanied. Little Jamie is playing hooky. All right, well.
Right.
So, the sheriff would take them into custody and march them up to the sheriff's office, terrified, of course, and their parents would come and collect them. This is the way it used to be in America. It wasn't this book 'em Dano mentality. It wasn't this law enforcement. It was community safety and service. And that community safety and service is what we need and want. We do not need to misapply these very intense international style law enforcement protocols to local people.
Right.
And so
we really don't need headbusters, right?
Yeah, well, and there's considerable difference between rural communities where everybody knows everybody and there's a relatively small number of people in a county, and some extremely populous and urban counties, such like, we find in LA, for example, where, 2 or 3 counties make up half the population of the state. I mean, it can get really urban, right? Sure. And they have different problems than rural sheriffs but they're still sheriffs, and there should still be that element of community safety and service that is oftentimes lacking from law enforcement personnel who are there more as to control and limit damage. Yeah. um, I, I have an example from when we had this giant wildfire that was consuming hundreds of homes and garages and businesses. And the state troopers came in and they closed all of the roads into and out of the area. But then that created a problem for people that were trying to get out, that were trying to evacuate. And for those that were trying to get in to get their families out, right?
Right.
And, the local sheriff came through and said, well, wait a minute, use some common sense here, fellas. Thomas has got to go back into the fire zone to pick up his aged mother. Otherwise, she's going to burn to death. Move your tushes. And if you don't feel that he should go back in there, you go back in there for him. You go get his mother out of that house. You don't sit here on your thumbs and mind the barricades.
Right.
So this is our local sheriff coming in and interjecting that whole ethos of community safety and community service back into a situation where, these state troopers come from other areas. They don't know the local people. And so, they interfere thinking they're doing the right thing when in fact they don't have the local knowledge to carry through on what really needs to be done. And that's where the local sheriff's office is so important. And that's why the sheriff is supposed to be the highest peacekeeping officer in the county and the highest ranking officer related to any kind of law enforcement in a county, is because he is the person who has that duty for community and service, and is supposed to know the local people and is supposed to know the local terrain. He's the one that is supposed to be directing the state troopers and, giving them their directions about what they're supposed to do to help in the given situation. And you can see how when we don't have a local sheriff on duty, where our community is suffering for the lack. Right. Because we don't have a voice. The National Guard comes in, wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. FEMA comes in, the state troopers come in, National Guard, whatever. They don't know you from Adam. They may live in the same state, but they don't necessarily know your community. They don't know what community service means. They don't know the local people. So without a sheriff, you've lost your voice. You've lost control. And you no longer have that element of community protection and service. So that's why we want our local sheriffs back, and we want them in the proper jurisdiction, and we want them clothed with the proper authority, and we want them to have the immunity that they're owed, and to be properly insured and bonded so that they do not have to bear the entire burden of liability. See, our sheriffs are public officials. They're public elected officials. And as our public elected officials, they are protected by public bonding.
Right.
They have a public oath, and they are protected by public bonding. All these guys that are playing at being sheriff and who are substituting themselves for our sheriffs and working, in fact, for foreign corporations are accepting a huge unbonded liability. And they don't even know it. They're given no warning. They are not told that, hey, you're working for a foreign corporation, and you have no actual authority as a sheriff. We're just calling you a sheriff because it's convenient. And you are actually responsible. You are 100% commercially and personally liable for everything that you do. I mean, how many of these guys would take a job like that, knowing that they could lose their home, their car, and their job if they make a misstep?
Right. So I have a question for you, Anna. And I've heard this term used. I know it's a traditional English term called reeve, but many of the assemblies have difficulty with calling their sheriffs reeves. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Well, the problem is that it isn't our word that's wrong. Sheriff is correct. The problem is that it's like so many other things associated with the land jurisdiction. The sea jurisdiction people have taken it over and have misapplied it. Just like we have district assemblies and municipal assemblies. That's an oxymoron. Okay, they're trying to confuse the issue. They're using the word assembly to make it seem like they're the state assembly or the county assembly, and they're not. They're mixing apples and oranges. Mm-hmm. And it's the same thing when you have a sheriff who's working for a foreign commercial corporation. He really shouldn't be called a sheriff, even if that's the job he's trying to take over and do.
Right. So sheriff is an appropriate term for our sheriffs on our American counties.
For the counties, yes.
Okay. So I have a lot of people who wonder what the sheriff's committee on a county would do, and who's involved in that county, in that sheriff committee.
Well, if you have a sheriff's committee, they're working with issues that have to do with the sheriff's office. The budget, for one, facility needs, infrastructure support, every kind of question you could come up with would route through that committee. Does the sheriff need 2 new squad cars? Should they be SUVs or should they be trucks? Do we need a canine unit in our county? If so, how are we going to pay for it? Where is it going to be stationed? Do we need to have an enlarged or new jail facility? All these different kinds of questions can go to the sheriff's committee. And this can be kind of a two-way valve here, where the sheriff can use the sheriff's committee to bring forward issues to the assembly, the county assembly. And the county assembly can take its concerns to the sheriff's committee to bring it forward to the sheriff's office. And that way, it kind of gives the sheriff a group of helpers, people that are kind of in the middle there, trying to expedite things and trying to get answers and trying to communicate about the issues that are brought forward from either side.
Right. So would the sheriff's committee also be looking at working with training resources?
Absolutely. And also, starting the process within the community, who can be a deputy? Why should you accept service as a deputy? What's expected of you as a deputy? Different examples of when deputy service might be required. There are all sorts of things that can be handled through a sheriff's office committee, where you can have education for the community as well as for the officers.
All right, great. So I've got a couple questions here. Here's one. We would like to get our federal postal area court up for Area 8, so our courts have enforcement. That's Arizona. Any direction on this process?
Well, it's rather difficult at the present time because the postal service that is operating at this time is the U.S. U.S. Postal Service. It's not the post office. Okay. So until your post office is restored, your federal postal court is in limbo too. Now, we can operate it as the federation, right? But then again, you are dealing with people who are going to have questions. They're going to resist in some respects. I mean, it was just this past week that President Trump lost his bid to claim all our property as abandoned property. So this is all happening in real time. And all the people that are involved, all the various bureaucrats, have to be informed from both sides. I have that example of the 2-lane highway. You've got your 2 lanes, and we're 1 lane, and the politicians and the system that we're used to at this point is the other lane. Well, imagine a big blizzard has come, and here's Mr. Trump. He and Elon Musk are driving this big snowplow, right? They're just moving through all this snow, and they're casting it off on every side. It's going into the ditch. It's going onto our lane. It's causing all this chaos. I mean, it has to be done, but it's still causing a lot of disruption for us and for them, right? Sure. And so this is not the best moment in history to try to resurrect a federal postal area court, because the municipal government that would have been responsible for a postal service issue and service isn't there at the moment. What you've got is a British territorial entity instead, and God knows they're being torn up one side and down the other too. So I would just wait, and if you have a need for something, a federal court need, there is the Court of Federal Claims in the District of Columbia. The problem is that it takes forever to get anything through the Court of Claims. Mm-hmm. They're grossly understaffed. And so I know Native groups that have had claims before the Federal Court of Claims for 20 years. Mm-hmm. Now, if we get our postal area courts up and running, for certain kinds of claims and certain kinds of issues that are unique to that airy-fairy jurisdiction, they're very efficient once you have them up and running, but they're limited to municipal government and those kinds of federal services. And usually what we're dealing with are the more intractable things that we're going to have to deal with in the coming immediate future are going to be coming at us from the territorial side. So I would not spend a lot of time and effort right now trying to get your federal postal area courts up for all the above reasons. None of that stuff is going to get resolved for at least another year.
Right. Yeah, that's the hardest part for everybody is, a lot of people think that once you stand, once you get ex parte Milligan declared, your courts are open, it's magic. And no, it's a fight. It's a fight. So, and it's going to continue to be that fight until we get the acquiescence and the recognition that we are the superior system, and that we have the superior claim, and it's coming. It's slow, the ruling with Trump, and not being able to claim the trust, and not having the standing that begins. That's a significant part of that communication too.
Right. Well, it is, and we are trying to protect our people and assert our natural and unalienable rights and our constitutional guarantees. And we have every right to do that. However, at the same time, we have to be familiar enough with their operations to realize that they have their citizenry and their personnel that they need to be able to deal with too. So when we're talking about it being superior, we're talking about our court being superior to theirs for our people, for our issues, our jurisdiction. We're not talking about it in any kind of ultimate sense because, to each their own. They have their own court system. They have their own traditions. They have their own citizenship obligations, which attach to them at birth. It's not really appropriate for us to be commenting on how our subcontractors run their business, so long as our subcontractors are performing their contract adequately, right?
Right.
We don't really care if they want to burden themselves down with 80,000 or 80 million statutory laws, codes, regulations, and ordinances.
As long as they realize it doesn't apply to us, we're happy, right?
And as long as we're not paying for the enforcement thereof.
There you go. That too.
As long as they're staying in their box and observing their limits and only charging us for what they legitimately are hired to do, well, then we're happy as clams. I mean, they can go out and hang naked from the yardarm for all we care, as long as they're being as long as they're performing their contract and minding their own business and keeping the books honest. We're like any other employer. The missing piece here has been that we haven't been doing our job. We haven't been telling our employees what we want done. We haven't been setting their priorities for them. We haven't been making it clear what we would pay for and what we would not pay for. And they've been running wild for decades, in charge of the shop, doing whatever they thought they could get away with, without instruction and without guidance, without a clear authority. And so, our role is to come back in and take up that position as the employer and to tell these people, okay, well, here's your contract. Here's what it says. It applies to the parent corporation. Therefore, it applies to the franchises of the parent corporation. And how are you doing?
Right. Exactly. Well, and that goes back to the point of the Sheriff's Committee, why it's important that our Sheriff's Committee, that helps provide some of that direction and oversight and communication to our sheriffs so that they don't get into an isolation. I call it an echo chamber, where they only are hearing themselves and thinking that's a great idea, right? That they have the community who's saying, yeah, it's Otis is out there, and Otis is driving. You need to be watching for Otis and putting back on track here,
Yeah,
So,
well, and that's exactly so. At all levels, both for our lawful government and for our legal subcontractors, they need to hear from us. What's important to us? How do we want these issues dealt with? Um, you know, for example, all those counties along the border, the people who actually live there need to be heard from. They need to find their voice. They need to do it lawfully. They need to do it politely, but they need to assert their right to safety and security and sanity in their own county.
right,
And if the county feels that, they have pity for the immigrants and they want to do something toward educating the immigrants who are coming across the border, uh, sure, they can spend time and money and county personnel effort uh, educating immigrants, for example. Counties have a lot of leeway as to, how they respond. Maybe they want stricter enforcement in their county uh, against vagrancy. Maybe you have strong county vagrancy laws. It depends upon the people who are living in a particular county
right.
and what
And
their priorities are.
again, once funding comes through, many of those issues become something that reverts back to, like vagrancy, reverts back to being able to get people to change their status, self-govern, help them get oriented and back on track, and eliminate those types of social issues in funding from our side of the government, essentially. So I mean, there's just so much we have to do and look forward to. And anybody that's not involved, that's just sitting back and listening, needs to realize that they're a big part of that. They've got to be able to engage and help
Right.
out.
Right. And certainly the local sheriff's office is that linchpin that stands between the rest of the world and the local population of their county. They become the voice of their county and their people.
Right. Exactly. Well, Anna, we've been about an hour and 10 minutes. I don't really have any more questions from our people. So how about if we give your voice a break and call it a day? I know, call it a day, and we'll pick up next week. Hopefully, we can finish up counselors of law and public notaries, and then we'll be off on process of jural assembly. So we can talk about that.
Okie dokie.
All right. Well, thanks very much. We appreciate you coming in and talking to us again about sheriffs, and we'll look forward to completing these roles. All right.
We'll get there.
All right. Thank you, Anna.
Take care, Lisa.
I
See you
will.
next
All right. Bye-bye, everybody.